Good afternoon, my name is Dave Norton from Discovering New England History, and we're going to continue on with our story here about King Philip's War, and this will be episode number 2. And of course it's from 1675 to 1676, about 14 months, and we'll go to the next slide. Now here's a story here. Edward Bobbitt from Dighton, Massachusetts, June 25th, 1675. He had a wife and 9 children and a dog. And once a month, they would take the journey from Dighton, Massachusetts, all the way to the Taunton Green and get supplies. So one day he ran up to they all got to Taunton. His wife said, "You forgot this item." They don't describe what it was. So he said, "Okay, I'll have to go back." He said, "I'm taking a dog with me, and I'll go back." So he goes all the way back down to Dighton, back down to his home, gets whatever the item is, and starts heading north to Taunton. Then he senses that he's being followed by a group of Wampanoags. So he starts walking a little faster. It was the middle of the summer, a lot of leaves on the trees. I guess he wouldn't run around a bend or whatever, so he decided to climb the tree, go up near the top of it, and hide. So the party, the warring party, if you will, that was following him, got back past the tree, and they didn't see him, but it was a giveaway. The dog was at the bottom of the tree and kept on barking at him to come down. So the Wampanoags took careful aim, shot him, killed him. He fell out of the tree down on the ground. And where he fell, back in those days, that's where they buried you, right there, wherever you fell. Now, I took this picture here on the right, and that's in actually somebody's front yard in Dighton, memory of Edward Bobbitt. He was the first soldier, or actually civilian, killed in Taunton in the King Philip's War. And on the left, many, many years ago, someone found this odd-looking stone at the side of the road, and I guess turned it into some historical folks, and lo and behold, it was Edward Bobbitt's headstone. And you can see right there on the top of it, Bobbitt, and with the date on it. Amazing. So that was, and now you can find it if you go to the Old Colony Museum in Taunton, Massachusetts. It's right there on the display. So it's an important part of history, and certainly of the King Philip's War. We'll go to the next slide. Now we're moving right along. Things are getting heated up here. A lot of individual skirmishes between the Wampanoags and the homeowners, and between cattle where they were supposed to be and not contained, and sheep and everything. There's all kinds of problems going on here. So having said that, what they did is they sent 200 militia to reinforce the Myles Garrison, which is in Swansea. And that's a picture. I stood there on a bridge, and it said there was a bridge there at that time. Now, of course, they probably didn't have any dams or anything like that, certainly back in the day. So this may have been a lot smaller stream at that point in history. But this is going to play an important part now, because there were attacks on individual homes in Swansea, and they gathered 200 militia. We'll go to the next slide. And that's the Garrison house. I was lucky to get that nice painting. No longer there. And several Rehoboth soldiers are actually part of that contingent of militia. Robert Smith, Israel Smith, John Miller, and Joseph Smith. They were all there. And this is to be the first battle of King Philip's War. So we'll go to the next slide. Now there's a marker there now. You can see it on the right where the Garrison house was. And of course that's all fortified. You can imagine 200 militia there. Benjamin Church, who we'll talk about a lot, he was there, and he changed tactics here. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, he said, give me several militia. So they gave him a small force. And they charged across the bridge on the other side to try to disperse the Wampanoags on the other side who were firing at them from across the river. And 11 in his party were there, and I believe 8 of them were killed. So they came back across the bridge, and then a little bit later in time, they had a larger contingency go across the bridge, and they dispersed the Wampanoags. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is the monument. I'll just read to you. It's actually there at the house where the garrison site was. First battle of King Philip's War. Near this spot stood the John Myles Garrison House, the place of meeting of the troops of Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth colonies, commanded by James Savage and James Cudworth, who marched to the relief of Swansea at the opening of King Philip's War, 1675. There fell in Swansea slain by the Indians Nehemiah Allen, William Cahoon, Gershom Cobb, John Drudge, John Fall, William Salisbury, William Hammond, John Jones, Robert Jones, Joseph Lewis, John Salisbury. So that's, you can see that, it's very easy to get to. It's right off of Route 6. So we'll go to the next slide. Also now, the Wampanoags, the Reverend Myles, that was his garrison house, and he formed that congregation there. But a short distance from that house, a few miles, they had erected a church, and it's actually been credited in 1663 as the first Baptist church was founded in Swansea, or actually all in Massachusetts right there. And there's a picture of it, which you can find. It's on the Swansea-Barrington line in that particular area. This is very important because that church was actually burnt to the ground during King Philip's War. We'll go to the next slide. Now, there was a larger Wampanoag attack at the Russell Garrison, which is in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts. 30 houses. They attacked in force, and they torched 30 houses, and of course all the inhabitants went to another garrison called the Russell Garrison. So you can see now things are starting, the war has started, and it's really getting out of control. We'll go to the next slide. And that's a great picture there. That's the actual site of the Russell Garrison, South Dartmouth, Massachusetts. That's all you see there, with a plaque on the rock. And basically, that's where all the homeowners went, and they survived. All their houses, 30 homes, were burnt right to the ground. Go to the next slide. In July 1675, talk about this gentleman here. Name is John Thompson, and he had a house in Halifax. And you can see the marker right off the highway in Halifax. Basically, his home was attacked and was burnt right to the ground. He escaped. He was the first settler in Halifax. The house was burned. You can see right says on the plaque, King Philip's War. And it's kind of interesting what they did. I looked this up here. Is that monument on the right? That's actually the hearthstone to his fireplace. So that was the only thing that was left, and I guess they stood it upright and carved in an opening and placed this plaque in front of it. John Thompson. So we'll go to the next slide. Now in Middleboro, that was attacked, and you can see there was a large Wampanoag contingent, and they were just attacking one settlement after another. And then, of course, the homeowners, all they would do is leave their houses, escape if they could, go into a garrison house nearby, and hopefully survive all of these attacks that were happening all over Massachusetts. In this particular case, Middleboro was attacked, and everyone that made it out of their homes went to the Thompson Garrison down in Middleboro. We'll go to the next slide. And the Thompson Garrison house, it's overlooking the Massacre River. It's not there anymore. The house is long gone. But that's a typical Garrison house that I had there over on the left in that picture. But that is the Massacre River. And you can imagine this, all the Wampanoags are on the other side of the river, and all the homeowners all evacuated. All their houses are just burnt right to the ground. They all got together in this Garrison house, not knowing what their fate was going to be. We'll go to the next slide. So here I found out, I went through his story in there in Middleboro, and what happened was, if you can see, where that Garrison house now is actually the baseball field in the back of a middle school in Middleboro. So I took that picture when I went there. And the river is between that baseball field, and if you look closely, that house you can see in the middle of the picture. Now, where that house is, there's a large rock. And all the warriors are across the Massacre River, which flows between where that house is up on that rise there and where the Garrison house is here in the baseball field. They had them basically surrounded, and they were terrifying all those settlers that were in the Garrison house. Now, John Thompson, he had this real long rifle called the Thompson Gun, but he wasn't that good of a marksman. So he took a look at all those that were in that house, and this fellow Isaac Howland, who was the son of John and Elizabeth Howland of Pilgrim fame, he was one of the militia that was in that house. And so he volunteered to take one shot. The Wampanoag was standing on top of this rock, and all he was doing is daring everybody to come over and, as they said in history, flinging insults at everyone here, and no one knew what was going to happen. So Thompson, they said, look, I want you to just take my long gun and aim over there just to scare them and fire a shot to know that we're going to stay here and we mean business. So anyway, he actually did that. He had one shot. Now this is a musket, which is a smooth barrel, not very accurate. It shoots a round ball. And the distance was measured by historians of a half a mile. And in terms that we could really understand, that's equivalent to the length of 9 football fields. So he takes the musket, he fires one shot, and he hits the Wampanoag. He hits the Wampanoag and he falls off the rock, and he actually kills him, which is, to this day, that's documented as the longest musket shot, half a mile. Just to give you an idea, an M14 rifle is probably good at only a quarter of a mile, and that's a rifle. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, this was on private property, so I had to do some phone call. The Historical Commission in Middleboro told me I know the name of the person that owns the property where the rock is. You can't go see it. I said, well, I'm interested. It's called Hand Rock. And I would, so he gave me the phone number, and I gave the fellow a call, and he was very receptive. And he said to me, okay, it's Sunday. We generally don't like folks coming over on our property, but we are home. If you can get here in a half an hour, I'll show you where this incident happened. I said, I'll be there. So there's my picture, and my hand is on a handprint. What they did is to commemorate the loss of this brave Wampanoag, they took his right hand and traced it on there and then carved it out. And I wanted to see if that was still there. So we'll go to the next slide. And I circled it. If you really look closely, you can see the 4 fingers and the thumb and the entire hand there. So that's a bit of history that is still there, but of course it's on private property. We'll go to the next slide. Now, I found this photo, this gentleman here, probably 1920s or something like that. Someone had taken his picture with this Thompson gun. And you can see it there. It's 7.5 feet long, weighs a little over 20 pounds. And that's the rock on the right. That's what it looked like before. Of course, way back in the day, before all the homes were there and the area was developed. We'll go to the next slide. And the rifles is still in existence. The family donated it to the Old Colony Museum in Taunton, Massachusetts. So I've heard about that, went there. There I am, and next to the rifle. It's an incredible part of history, and it's preserved and still there if you go there. We'll go to the next slide. Now, out west here, this was the far west of the United States back then, New Braintree, Massachusetts. Things were really heating up, and now the NIT Monk warriors were getting involved in King Philip's War. So a fellow out in that area, Captain Wheeler and Captain Hutchinson, they wanted to meet with the NIT Monks, work out some kind of treaty, because they heard about all the houses being burned, and they did not want that to happen to their community. So the NIT Monks said, okay, we'll do that. Come and meet us up at a certain point on a big, large field, and we'll get together, talk, and see what we can work out. So Captain Wheeler and his group of maybe 15 to 20 riders on a horseback rode up here. And when they got to this meeting point, nobody was there. So they decided either A, we go back, or B, we go a little bit further, maybe we can catch up with them. So they decided to go a little bit further. And of course there's a monument on the left there, a monument to this story. So we'll go to the next slide. And I found this incredible painting. It shows the NIT Monks crouching below this log here, and you see the field in the background, and you can see the horses with their riders riding at the edge of the field, unsuspecting. Well, what they were drawn into was an ambush. The NIT Monks didn't want to have anything to do with them, didn't want to talk any treaty or any peace, and they were in force. And what they did is they let the riders go, pass them by. They had another group surround them on the right, another group surround them on the left, and they just opened fire and killed mostly everyone there. That was in New Braintree, Massachusetts, and now we're moving along the next month into August of 1675. And so a few of the survivors made it, and they made it down to a place called Brookfield. So we'll go to the next slide. And then what we call here, this is in Brookfield. The NIT Monks actually did not want to have a treaty. They attacked the town of Brookfield and started torching all the houses. And once again, all the homeowners went into a Brookfield, a garrison house. They left all their homes, ran to the garrison house. Now, I took a picture of this. I circled it in red, and that's where the actual garrison house foundation, part of the foundation is. And that picture I took, I was standing up on a large hill, and I was right next to, on the left there, what they call Indian Rock. This is the place where the NIT Monks were all along the rise on the hill, and they had the house surrounded. And it was going to be a siege. I'll go to the next slide. And you can see, now I'm taking it down where the house was. I'm standing basically where the foundation was. And the first circle there's a well, and there's part of the foundation wall, and the higher circle there up on the top is where Indian Rock is. You can actually go there and just imagine what they did. 80 settlers left their homes. They were all torched, and there was a 3-day siege. They were completely surrounded, but they were well armed. There were 80 settlers, and they fought off attack after attack for 3 days. Go to the next slide. Now, what they did on the raid, of course, the NIT Monks, they had muskets, they had flaming arrows, and they sent down a burning cart from the top of the hill and rolled it all the way down to smash into the house and set it on fire. And before that, to set up, this was 3 days, all day long. They were firing and they were shooting, and at night they were shooting these flaming arrows up into the roof of the house, trying to burn it. And those that were trapped inside the house tried to figure out what we're going to do. So they started punching holes through the roof of the house. And his son fell up there on the roof, and when the flaming arrows would come and hit the roof, he would just go over to them and rip them out, snuff out the fire. And believe it or not, it was working. Very, very courageous job. Now the NIT Monks are really getting upset. You know, the flaming arrow, that looks like that's not going to work. They can't attack because they're overwhelmed. And an important part of this picture, famous picture in history, you can see that on the right. You can see I circled, there's a well right in front of the foundation of the house. And one of the settlers went out there to get water from the bucket, and he was shot and killed and hit with arrows and everything else right there at that well. The picture on the left, there's my daughter. She's standing on a covered well, that same well, and you can see in the fore part of the picture, there's a monument there, and that's just the part of the Garrison house that's left. And of course, you can imagine behind her there that this thing coming down, flaming, loaded with all kinds of combustibles, hay, and whatever they had, ready to just crash right into that house. So we'll go to the next slide. And what happened here, you can see on the right, they sent it all the way down. If you look real carefully, you can see it fell on top of the roof there. You can see all the arrows sticking in the roof. Right at the time the wagon, flaming as it is, hit the house, there was a tremendous cloud burst came over, and it just absolutely torrential rains, and it put out the fire in the wagon, and it put out the all the arrows that are in the roof. Now on the left, the alarm went out. Once all the house went up in flames in the community. This is the far west of the United States, if you can imagine that now. There was a Garrison house in Groton, Massachusetts, and that's probably what it would have looked like. It took that house is actually in Groton, typical house. And the alert went out, so they rode 30 miles on horseback, 48 troopers to the rescue of Brookfield. Now, they made it all the way to Brookfield, got in there, and they actually had once again, it was another fight. All the folks in that house were trapped in there for 3 solid days. And the NIT Monks retreated. Interesting part of history, the Groton Garrison, a fellow by the name of Samuel Cleveland, he was with the riders that rode to the rescue of Brookfield, and I am a direct descendant of him. And on the right, in the Brookfield siege, a fellow by the name of John Norton could have been in that house. I did a lot of research on that. And of course, the settlers and the militia occupied that house after the skirmish. Now, whether he came up with another contingent and occupied the house, whether he was in the house and survived. I'll never know that. Someday, on some record, I'll find that out. So we'll go to the next slide. And we had another further down there in South Deerfield, Massachusetts. Now, the next month, September 1675, and they call this the Bloody Brook Massacre. Once again, this is out west, and the community had, it was in the fall, and they just had a great crop harvest, so they really needed that, so they got all their covered wagons together, loaded it up with corn and everything they could, and started heading away from the NIT Monks in this wagon train. September 1675. They got down to South Deerfield, where they thought they paused there, and they thought they were going to be safe there. Well, the next slide. And that's the site right there. On the right, there's the Bloody Brook Creek. And on the left, that's a very old picture. And you can see it shows Bloody Brook down there, and it also shows a monument there. And you can see it wasn't certainly not developed back then. It was the far west. We'll go to the next slide. And that's that monument there. September 1675. So 79 men were in this caravan. 60 of them were all ambushed and killed. And it was a incredible massacre that they had. And that's, I think we're going to stop right here. You can see there's the part of the creek there. But a couple of books here. King Philip's War, of course, is the one I use for my reference. And this other book here is very good. This other book on the Massachusetts right here. And that's where it gets all the information of all the soldiers and battles and what they fought for the state of Massachusetts. And that's all put together. What an incredible piece of history right there. That's how I got all the information on my descendants. So once again, we're going to continue this story in part 3 of what happened here. It's Dave Norton from Discovering New England History. Have a good afternoon.